Sorry. Who is speaking?
I was about to.
Okay, all right, Mpilo. Actually, can I please bring you in with this question on a focus that Slee had done, which was the idea of youth. And I wanted to ask, how do we go about implementing successful sex education in South Africa in these youth spaces? And Mpilo, could you please elaborate on that? And in your elaboration, could you please speak on the different contexts of youth in South Africa, as well as how we could incorporate ideas of consent and gender? Because I think that plays a very large role in the ill that we're fighting here.
I think we need to be honest and take a moment to really understand that in this country, we have different speeds. Some of us are caught up to the gender-based violence chat all the way to pronouns. Some people are only finding about it yesterday. Some people don't even see the whole gender-based violence, and I'm talking about women and men. So when we do sex education, we have to catch everyone up to the same speed. When we bring in and matters of consent and all that stuff, for me, it has to come from the institutions themselves and how they deal with it. Because I know in my high school, it was very troubling how they push consent and say consent is, this massive thing. But when scandals occur, consent is the last thing that they ask about. They go straight to, punishing, often victim blaming, and not really engaging with okay, wait, let's deal with what had happened first. And I think there's got to be more tone adjustment in how it's taught, because consent can't be just an optional thing that's, she'll say yes, or just keep trying, she'll agree. And then when she agrees, then it's fine. You need to say that consent is a staple before, we have sex or whatever, that consent is a necessary staple, and that we can't just overlook it in terms. So I feel like.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Hello. Hi. Could you please repeat that last part? I think we all missed it.
So I said that when it comes to sex education, we have to be abrupt about it. We have to come through and say that consent and everything has to be pushed harder, and not just as a suggestive, oh, this is, sex, just ask her nicely, she'll say it. It needs to be pushed harder, as well as in terms of all the complications around, having sex, the emotional parts of it. We need to address that sex is not just the physical aspect, it's how you ask for it, it's how you engage in it, talk about things like coercion, because a big part of what we are seeing, especially in male culture, is that there's an entitlement going on. A lot of that happens because when we talk about sex, we don't talk about it from a woman's perspective. Very seldom do we talk about it from a woman's perspective. And I think that needs to change as
well. I think that, sorry, can I jump in here?
No problem.
For me, the issue is that in South Africa, there's varying qualities of education, right? So we have the small portion of us who go to private schools and have the good LO education, and the public school education whose LO system is not as great as some private schools. So at every level, different people are on different levels in terms of their education. But also, if we think about the contents of the sexual education, is that they tend to perpetuate binaries and heteronormativity, and most of the time it aims to dictate people's sexualities and sort of not encourage promiscuity. So in terms of the content that is taught, there definitely a standard that is established, as well as when we look at the teachers who are teaching LO, that's a very important job that a teacher has, because you influence the way that people view sex and people view themselves and the roles that they play in sexual relations. So teachers also play a good job, and it's very important to screen teachers for their biases that they may have, or have workshops where we recall all the adult teachers and make sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of education. Yeah.
Can I come in there? I absolutely love what Pelo said, and I'm just going to add to that, is that the thing is, South Africa, and I'm going to go back to Lux's original question and how it actually answers part of this, is that South Africa is different from the rest of the world. And our education system, unfortunately, post-1994, was not designed for our society. Our government went and picked things from different nations with different economic structures, and they brought in things that just were not designed for where we were as a nation and how we structure those classes and how we teach students. So the first thing for me when I think about a solution around GBV that would affect the youth is the education, definitely, our curriculum. But I'm not talking LO, I'm not talking high school. I'm talking from grade 1, that you begin to teach children. Now, I'm not saying you don't teach children sex. It's not the role of the school to teach them about sex and things like, like in grade 1, obviously, because parents will be like, oh my gosh, no. But you begin to teach them about gender equality, about a person's value. You teach them about women and men. You teach them about choice. You teach them about identities. You teach them about, hey, listen, your body, their body. You teach them, you teach little children. So when a child sees someone who's different from them, whose life is different, who's making a different choice, it's nothing that breaks society apart. They're not scared of it. They're not confused by it. So you teach that. So by the time that you start having conversations around when they're a little older, around sex and consent and things like when you have one-on-one with guys, so when a girl says no and things like that, right? It's not foreign to them. You're not talking to them about, oh wait, this person who is an individual has the right to say no. You're already teaching something that's been ingrained in them. When they see someone, transitioning, they're not like, oh my gosh, because the stuff has been taught to them. And a certain sense of community and society and acceptance can be taught in schools without parents losing their minds on, oh my gosh, they want to teach our children sex and, we're all going down to hell, which is not what it means. It just means that we are educating our children to be more socially aware, more conscientized, and more human, and have a sense of ownership over their bodies and to respect other people's ownership over their bodies. And when we get that right from grade 1, which is age appropriate, obviously, and as they grow up, these things begin to make sense and it's easier. I think that's how you begin to tackle GBV.
So, you raise a couple of critical points. I think the first one, in terms of our educational system, I think it's no secret that in general, our education system hasn't changed over the last 100 years or so. The second one is, we could argue until we're blue in the face about when is the right time to teach about sexual education. But I want to rope in Given here to add on to Nobu's point before I hand over to my co-facilitator. What I've heard everybody say so far is that social education is something that is undermined in the educational space. And by that, I mean, over and above the maths and science that I'm learning, the social education, and Nobu made a point to this. So Given, I'm gonna ask you, are they, in your opinion, and in terms of a solutions-based, how important is social education? And when I say social education, I mean, as an educator, when a child asks me a question, am I equipped not to give my own personal point of view? Am I equipped to give a general point of view? with facts and figures and give the child the opportunity to make their own decisions. Because I think where we're faced now is that in trying this socialist education that's very informal, of course, everything's very opinionated and you know, the rhetoric is, according to me and my perception, but is that the right way to be educating? So given, again, I ask, how important is social education on behalf of our educators that have such a big influence and a role, as Nobu said, on learners in school, and particularly, I guess, to sexual education?
I mean, firstly, it's very, very powerful intervention by Nobu. I think she really hit the nail on the head. And I think as a follow-up, your question is a very good question, because as Nobu was speaking, I was thinking of socialization. You know, we have, I mean, two modes of socialization. We have primary socialization and we have secondary socialization. So when we focus, for example, on educators and the role that they play, I think sometimes we slightly neglect the role of primary socialization, which is home, which is the household, right? And then, but also I think what we don't account for is the context in which the teachers and the parents exist in. We know a lot of sex education is met with a lot of apprehensiveness. Now, whether that apprehensiveness makes sense or not, I mean, that's a discussion for another day. But it needs to be understood that teachers and the parents of the students exist in a wider societal context. A wider societal context that's in and of itself still needs work, you know? So you do then understand when parents meet, when parents are slightly, you know, taken aback by the introduction of sex education, because they themselves do not know, have never received sex education. So I like your question, Lux, because now it talks about the greater society. Sex education at school is definitely important, and what Nobu said, I think I do, you know, I take away from it if I'd add from that, but I'd say then from a larger society point of view, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so speaking of social educators, I always think of, we know, we particularly, I'm going to speak of myself as a man, we undermine the effectivity of how you are raised as a man, as a boy child. A lot of the things that happen around us, a lot of them seemingly innocuous, you know? I always give the example of, for example, men don't cry. You know, I mean, that's how most of us grew up, you know? That's an innocuous statement to make, you know? But it's a very toxic statement to make, right? But in the context in which our parents made those statements, where they exist in a patriarchal society that determines the norms, it is hard for them to see the toxicity of what they say. So I think then, to answer your question, Lax, I mean, there are a lot of components to this question, but one, there's a lot that needs to happen in society, particularly with the older generation as far as accountability is concerned, which will be slightly a bit hard, because when you grow up, say for 20 years in a highly patriarchal society, patriarchy becomes part of your identity. So if given comes to you after 20 years to tell you that actually men can cry, I think that's a big existential crisis for any person, to find out after 20 years that it's actually okay to cry. You know, so that's the first part, the accountability and acknowledgement of the toxic nature of patriarchy as a society, particularly when men, I always say that men need to realize that the jig is up. Men have been found out, patriarchy is no longer working both for women and for men, you know? So I think for me, that's the first step, to acknowledge that and be accountable, that here we live in a society that favors a particular group, i.e. men. I think that's the first step. And then the second step, like, you know, I always say this on social media, is that I take social education like social media. Because you don't buy people data, everyone says what they want to say, but the truth is they are facts. You know, I mean, you can't take away people's freedom of speech, but then they are facts. For example, the first fact is that gender-based violence is violence that's enacted on a person due to their gender, and most of the time it is a woman. So I think then in our role in being social educators, we need not shy away from the facts. For example, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a social educator, but as someone who engages with society, I'm always, almost every day, I'm almost, maybe should I say, attacked by men who think I'm anti-men, you know? But the facts are, yes, men also are victims of gender-based violence, but the facts are it affects women more. So we need to be accountable, and we need to, I suppose, as men in particular, acknowledge the system in which we exist, which predominantly benefits and privileges men. But also, you know, this is both good and bad in the sense that South Africa's high rate of gender-based violence demonstrates sharply the privilege that men hold. And that's a fact. I think then we do have real life examples of, I suppose, of material in which to teach, you know, and it hurts saying this because when I'm talking about material, I'm even talking about real life situations. We see this in our media every day, you know.
Hi, Given. Hi. Sorry, I just want to cut you off real quick, or really extend on something that you said here.
Yeah.
You've spoken about patriarchy.
Yeah.
And patriarchy is a very cultural thing that happens in society. And I think in our past episodes, we've talked about how culture has been such a huge theme of course throughout our conversations. I wanted to ask Slee, I wanted to review in here, how do we modernize South African culture across the board in order for us to be able to have women participating in culture and also being able to be their full selves in their own personal identities?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So I think a lot of the times cultures become either limiting to women, but at the same time liberating. And what I mean by that is a lot of the people associate culture with a sort of unity and solidarity among, for instance, the Zulus or the Xhosas and so forth, right? Yet that same kind of association with culture being a form of, you know, comradeship and unity is also the same force that also prohibit women from accessing certain desires and needs because of their gender. So you have an issue of gender oppression that's there because of culture. So I think in the idea of modernizing culture is very tricky because when we modernize culture, a lot of people tend to feel that, okay, if you are, for instance, a Zulu woman who doesn't do certain things, for instance, fetching the water from the river or whatever it may be, if you obtain a Western education, that instantly is like a form of eliminating yourself as a person of, you know, of a traditional culture kind of thing. So it's having sort of to have a sense of a line drawn where you still associate yourself as a particular culture, but at the same time, understanding your desires and your kind of needs as a person, as a woman, essentially. Because I think when we tend to take away ourselves out of culture, we immediately presume that we are saying that culture is toxic and we should eliminate it because it will not at all help the woman enhance herself as an individual. So it's having a sort of fine line. I don't know if anyone else wants to add on that, but it's very tricky to kind of modernize culture to be, how to say it, more achievable, more helpful towards women, but at the same time staying in your kind of cultural beliefs, if you get where I'm coming from.
I just have, I guess, a question, and if I may ask.
Sorry. Before you ask your question, just add to what she said. I think that a lot of the times people place such huge emphasis on staying with culture, and it's just very rigid, and like as if the things that were created were set in stone. But people forget that traditions and cultures were made by people, and so they can change by people. And so we take what works, the good stuff, and then that actually, if we say Indota and all of this doesn't work, let's change that, and it can be the improved version of our culture, not necessarily stripping the core identity of the culture, but it's like we're improving it and making it more relevant to the time that we live in.
I guess my question fits in nicely with what you just said, and I'm asking this to the women. How do you, and this is coming from, again, a place of curiosity for me, because, you know, I view like lobola as something that's like, you know, brings the families together, an essential part, but it's been highlighted that that's also a problematic part because it treats women like possessions and property and so on. And my view is it's not like that, but I mean, how do women positively, you know, change culture and not negatively change it? And by negative, I mean, in recent years, you know, there's been a sort of resentment of certain parts of the culture. So for example, a big thing is there's been a sort of resentment towards women who can do, you know, cooking, cleaning, and still work in the office. You know, there's been like a resentment, like, oh, me, I'll never do that because that's super patriarchal to cook and clean in a man's house. But I mean, some people just do enjoy it, and it's that kind of like a lot of people in the townships and in the rurals kind of, that's what they know. You know, it's that divide that gets created between, you know, my family, you know, the people who went to school and don't cook and clean, and then the people who do only just cook and clean. So how do you, as women, like positively, you know, navigate that space and like, positively change culture?
Can I answer? Okay. I think with my family, because my aunt is going through like a lobola process, the way that it was viewed is like families coming together. Again, it's about choosing what works and what doesn't work. So, and the way that we have conversations about lobola is not to say that he's selling this person and like as if she's an object. The way that we think about and where we engage in it is not in a way that objectifies the woman. And I think in my own capacity, I think it's just about change. Personally, I'm going to say they must buy me shares in the stock market. I don't want cows, buy shares in the stock market. Let's change to relevant we are now. And I think that what you a woman who can cook and a woman who doesn't clean or has a job. I think that's where feminism came in the first place. The idea that women have to be a certain way and you have to be a certain, if you aren't this way, then you're not a woman. It's about choice, that I can cook and I can clean and I can go and do my silver engineering job and come back to my family. It's just about allowing women to have the choice to do what they want. And if I don't want to cook, then I don't want to cook and I don't want to clean, and I should not be viewed as less than, or I'm not as good of a woman as someone who does cook and clean, because realistically those expectations are not placed on men. Whether a man can cook or clean is irrelevant. And like, but for us it's relevant. So it's just about like applying the same rules that are placed on women on men as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Mpilo. From your question, I think what I got is how there is maybe a disconnect you were sensing within the female community. And I want to direct this to my female panelists, is what do you ladies think our role is to fight gender-based violence together? So maybe you can address this perceived disconnect, but what do you think the role of a woman is, particularly in this fight against gender-based violence? And this is to my female panelists.
Yeah. Sorry, I can go. So yeah, I think the role is to be supporters. I think, you know, with feminist movements, and a lot of feminist women have a sort of camaraderie. And what I mean by camaraderie, I think this idea of we can share each other's sort of, you know, testimonies and issues that we face in concern with GBV, and this sort of safe space that we can give to each other. So I think from a points of building solidarity as women, and not feeling as if when we express certain things that it's judged or kind of looked at a different way, because I think we all have different views and experiences, but we can relate to that. And I think that's the sort of idea of having that unity and that sense of safe space, you know. So yeah, I think creating a safe space as women. Mm-hmm.
Right. And
sorry.
Webs, yeah.
Yeah, I think like she's saying, creating a safe space for other women to come and just like have conversation, and because again, going back to a topic that we've spoken about, different women are at different points in their education and different at different points in their understanding of feminism and what that means for them, and how things they've internalized, and some of them haven't yet interrogated it yet. And so everyone's just at different spaces, and we need to create that kind of understanding that everyone's different and we're all trying to help each other unlearn, learn, and grow and develop. And I also think that another thing that women can do, which is also a lot of the times, women also protect perpetrators in their family, which, like, there's always that uncle. People know there's that uncle that they say, don't go play with that uncle. Stay away from him. If that uncle wants to come to you, don't go. But like, they're in the family. There's a reason why it's this unspoken rule, but obviously the mothers and the women know that it's because...
Sorry, boys.
Yeah.
Sorry. We were losing you there for a second. Do you mind just repeating that part? No problem.
From where did you lose me? Where did you lose me from?
I think we lost you just before. I think just before you went into women protecting purpose. I think I heard that right. Or perpetrators.
And perpetrators. I was saying